Creates a world through that interaction between you and the computer.
Power is exercised by control of information channels.
Men and machines. Power Extreme!
You can have any world you want. Helmet, and on the top of the helmet, there are magnetic sensors for location and orientation of your head, or your body for that matter.
Troy was a kind of wunderkind, a sort of whiz kid who kind of emerged onto the scene about 12 years ago and came to my attention then. His kind of reputation preceded him as someone who'd created a kind of amazing portfolio of digital media works at a time when the word digital media was still fairly rarefied, and the idea of being a digital artist was something still kind of exotic. But Troy already had the reputation not for sort of novelty, but for someone who'd actually generated a reputation for creating kind of amazing but also pioneering works in that medium.
이 수묵 파초돌은 그 기품 있는 화면 구성과 괴석에 나타난 단목 효과의 청순함, 그리고 전멸된 원미점에서 느끼는 조화 감정에 모두 왕자다운 품격을 엿보이게 한다.
I started using technology almost by default, in that it's always been part of kind of day-to-day existence, so it's been part of my life for as long as I can remember. And I kind of recall even before I had what we might call a formal art practice, kind of playing with and programming my own games on a home computer. So I was kind of experimenting with the media as a form of self-expression, not really consciously, just as a like I said, by default. It's a part of a kind of natural response to my environment. This began really quite early on with experiments with video art and installation, where I was part of an experimental kind of digital art group called Cyberdata, where we experimented with kind of alternative aesthetics of computer graphics.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Executive Godzilla. Cyberdata are today announcing a new world order. Cybernetic subterfuge has begun. TVU transmissions are infiltrating the microwave links to major neurocentres in Melbourne and elsewhere. Karmic ruin is becoming harmonised to the new frequencies. Cyber supporters Swelltime Corporation are said to be funding the operation with candy coins and hell notes.
Troy's range of explorations, again, is very varied. In terms of the early work, I think he was interested, particularly with the Cyberdata Collective, he was interested in sort of a broad range of ideas to do with popular culture, particularly at the time the films he was doing, such as techno-digesto fetishism and films like that, with the sort of spectacle of body culture, particularly in television and other media. The whole idea of consumerism is very strong in these works, and other films such as Jawpan and Noodle Film, where Troy is interested in other cultures, in sort of a comparative cultural analysis or exploration of the way different cultures look at the popular, the way we live, everyday living, such things like eating and sex and bodybuilding, how these things are kind of part of what we do in daily life.
Custom hard, running at 1000 megahertz is the Sugar Supreme machine. Bite, chew, swallow, and poo your lover while every cell of their physical body receives loving tactile sensation.
I mean, electronic music is something that's both an inspiration and also an element that is very much an important part in a lot of the works that I've produced over the last 10 years or so. But one of the first kinds of music that I was really truly inspired by was all of the experiments with acid and techno, which go right back to the 80s and 90s. These kind of technological tools, which were created essentially for the purpose of emulating real instruments, were being explored for their other potential to create new realms, new soundscapes, new spaces that were kind of had this, I guess the tools were analog, but they had an electronic aesthetic.
We go beyond night light.
You won! You reach high level, make more and dollars. You get many prizes. You have won the grand prizes. You won a new reality.
Troy's work's coming from a background too that could be said draws on things like linguistics and disciplines such as semiotics. And I think Troy started to think that anything, of course, as semiotics dictates, is a sign. Anything can signify or mean something. And particularly in Troy's early work, I think he started to think that things beyond words or visual or symbolic signs that we normally associate with language were kind of interesting to create as kind of interfaces. So in his early animations, such as something like Japan in particular, or even Idea-On, his first significant interactive, I think he starts to think that sculptures, objects can constitute a sign and can mean something. But the real challenge, and this is one of the playful elements of Troy's work, he's not going to actually give us a dictionary. So we have to kind of find ways of understanding the way Troy's language works. We have to kind of get on to the wavelength of his playing with iconography. So his interpretation of semiotics was quite literal in that any sign system is arbitrary. It's only through consensus, through understanding, through agreement that we come to think of it as a language.
She knows the answer. She gives us life and accepts us in death.
In Semiomorph, I developed an idea around language and how that could be interfaced with gameplay in a digital game. And part of the way that that language would work is that it needed to be expressed in both terms, on a number of levels. It needed to be expressed as a visual language of signs. It needed to be expressed in terms of aesthetics of colour, of colour and form, and space as well, spatial relationships. And it also needed to be expressed in terms of music and sound.
Energy. Energy. Energy.
A lot of the work that I did right through most of the 90s was very much about looking into the space of the computer and exploring this digital realm, exploring its language, mapping out its territory, identifying endemic forms and properties that were kind of indicative of the nature of that space. Mixed reality, what I became interested in was how these forms, which had kind of evolved, I guess, not only obviously through my own work, but collectively through the whole kind of evolution of electronic space as a phenomenon and as a kind of mode of existence. A lot of these forms had kind of shifted outside of the digital realm and were starting to appear in the real world, either as literally as real objects, as in the case of mixed reality, but also in more subtle ways in terms of the way that we use kind of language, or the way that we kind of analyse and look at the real world is now kind of shaped in a lot of ways by our experiences in the virtual and the digital kind of realms. So in mixed reality, I was taking this language of game objects, these forms which had meaning and significance in terms of a game system, and placing them in a space where they could be experienced as real objects, as kind of tangible sculptural forms, but also translating some of the properties of those virtual objects into the real sculptures. In fact, I developed a term for these later, which was called them offline artifacts.
So the virtual for Troy is a way of imagining a kind of life on the other side of the screen. And this was something that was quite important to his early work, that there was a world there to be explored that was kind of invisible. Or to use, I think, an even more technical term from media theory, it was infravisible. It was actually beyond vision. And this is something I think Troy gives us as a media artist, and particularly as a visual artist, notwithstanding his interest in sound, and particularly the important work he's done with Ollie Olsen. But as someone trained in visual media, I think for Troy this was the real challenge, to create a kind of visual counterpart or a visual representation of digital code. But he did this in a way that created it again as an ecology, as a world populated, if you like, by these weird things that were alive and that we could actually interact with them, or they were lifelike in some way. And so in this sense, I think what Troy's work's really always been heading towards is a kind of, again, parallel interface between what we understand ourselves to be real people or real life beings and these kind of virtual life beings. They exist somewhere within something called cyberspace, which is the kind of space of the computer or a space generated by computer technologies. But in Troy's later work, particularly his installations such as Iconica and Artifact, What he's done, again, which is even more striking, I think, is actually started to bring the virtual into the real world.
As you walk into the installation space, the idea is that you kind of are experiencing this artificial world through 3 different modes. There's the images that show scenes from the space, and each of those scenes is depicted in these 2 modes of representation. The actual offline artifacts themselves represent manifestations of the objects and forms that have been brought back from this artificial world. And of course the video documentary shows scenes of the actual life forms and entities in action. Life science is an ecosystem of signs and symbols, and basically it brings together 3 themes into a hybrid world. It brings together the idea of artificial life and generative systems, so there's the idea of autonomous entities interacting with one another in a world to generate dynamics and processes that embody ideas of kind of alternative types of, alternative modes of existence, alternative types of life and so forth that can exist in the digital realm. It also works with this idea of computational semiotics, or explores the idea of a digital media language. So the artificial life forms themselves are expressed in terms of elements of a digital media language, such as form, colour, behaviour, sound, music, and so forth that's possible within the space of the computer. Thirdly, it looks at the gameplay possible in digital games. So it's set up in a simulated space which is navigated as you would navigate a digital game. You can fly around in real time, interact with entities and the life signs themselves, and play them. So the idea is that as you move through the space, you select life signs and you're then able to perform them as instruments. So you play them through an interface. Through that process, their own internal structure and kind of aesthetics is revealed through the process of play. So really the idea of life signs is this kind of concept of playing a world. So you're actually playing this simulation, and through that play are coming to understand it on its own terms, understand its own rules of existence, its own kind of systems and processes that are embodied within it.
What Troy did, I think, was to tackle that idea of abstraction head on, and to think, well, instead of thinking of it in arithmetical terms, just as numbers, which is not particularly sexy, and it's not particularly romantic, and the whole idea of when you think of cyberspace, in the way that films, say, such as The Matrix, and that whole genre or tradition of cyberculture films or cyberspace films have created it as a kind of a parallel world. Troy, I think, took another way into that, and to think, well, what if we think of it in terms of a life form, or a space of life? That digital code is like kind of genetic code. And this, I think, is where, again, his work's been quite important in slightly shifting the tenor of debate and the tenor of thinking about the digital and about code away from numbers to kind of life, or a kind of some sort of life essence, or artificial life for that matter. And again, the queer experience one's left with that is, well, how real is our world? How alive am I? How more alive am I than these creatures? And so in that respect, the whole idea of the digital is something that Troy's wanted to kind of liberate from the computer itself. He's wanted to liberate that idea of abstract code and bring it actually into the real world, so that, again, in a world where we talk about hyperreality and virtual reality, Troy's kind of really presenting some challenges to us in that we don't have any more of these strict demarcations between our world, the real world, and the world of the computer. They, in a sense, occupy the same space, the same time. And this is, I think, the real challenge of Troy's later installations in particular. And in this respect too, his work is really on a par with the most sophisticated critical theory and media theory to do with this kind of intermingling of the virtual and the real, which is again going on in our daily lives as we spend more and more time using SMS, using mobile telephony, using the internet as a kind of part of daily quotidian experience. I mean, we just can't sort of seem to think of life without it anymore. And again, as an analogue to that, this is what I think Troy's work's doing, particularly in installation works, is creating this kind of intrusion of virtual space, of cyberspace into the world of the everyday.